You don't get a name in the history books. You don't get a statue, a line in Herodotus, or a film where someone with impressive abs shouts dramatically about freedom. The men you served will be remembered for 2,500 years, their story turned into movies, merchandise, and at least one very enthusiastic energy drink brand. And you? You carried their gear, you armed them in the dark before battle, you guided one of them, half-blind, are dying, toward the past that would define Western civilization, and then you ran. And the historian who recorded it didn't even find your running particularly noteworthy. He mentioned it the way you mention weather. Of course the shield-bearer ran. What else would a shield-bearer do? That's the story we're telling today, not the Spartans. Theirs. The seven behind every one, the man behind the shield, and what it actually cost to belong to something that was never built with you in mind. Or you are born into it. There is no moment when someone looks at you and decides your fate. Your fate was decided before you existed by a conquest that happened generations ago, when Sparta subjugated the people of Laconia and didn't enslave them the way you'd buy a person at market. They didn't need to buy you. They declared the land theirs, and everyone on it theirs, and everyone who would ever be born on it theirs, stretching forward into time indefinitely. You are state property, not owned by any individual Spartan but by Sparta itself, which in some ways is worse, because there is no single master to appeal to, no owner whose interest in keeping you alive might occasionally work in your favor. Your family farms an assigned plot of Laconian soil. You plant barley and olives, tend the vines through every season, and give roughly half your yield to the master at harvest. You can live in a house, marry, raise children, and observe your own religious customs quietly, measured against the Roman slaves who will come centuries later, bought, sold, and worked to death in mines. Your material situation is meaningfully less desperate. And yet every year, the 5 magistrates who govern Sparta stand before the city and formally declare war on you. The declaration exists for one reason, so any Spartan can kill any shield-bearer at any time without offending the gods or breaking the law. You can be killed like an animal and the killer walks away clean. You outnumber the full Spartan citizens by perhaps 7 to 1, and they have always known it. And knowledge is the engine that drives the entire civilization. Thucydides will write it plainly. Most Spartan institutions have always been designed with a view to security against the Helots. The famous walls of Sparta are not stone. They are the warrior class itself, maintained at savage cost. You'd trained from childhood into the most effective land army in the ancient world, specifically to ensure you can never rise. You grow up in the shadow of the training system, the machine that takes Spartan citizen boys at 7 and produces soldiers by their mid-20s. You don't go through it. But when you are around 10, you are assigned as a servant to a boy your own age entering its early stages. You carry his equipment, fetch his food when he is permitted food, and live in his orbit. When in exchange for none of this, you absorb everything. The drills, the competitions, the constant low-grade violence that Spartan society uses as curriculum, the philosophy of silence and endurance the whole culture is organized around. You learn it all. You just don't get to claim any of it. The boys are deliberately underfed. Hunger sharpens the will, the theory goes, and stealing food without getting caught is its own form of military training. You watch them steal, and you cover for them sometimes because if the older supervisor notices, the boy gets beaten, and if he's beaten badly enough, he'll take it out on you that night. There is a ritual at the sanctuary of Artemis where piles of cheese are placed on an altar, and boys must steal them while older men beat them with whips. The blood is real. Cicero will visit the ruins centuries later and write about boys flogged until the blood flows abundantly without a single cry or groan. You have seen it. And here is something the romantic version of Sparta always forgets to mention. You are sometimes required to attend the warriors' communal evening mess, not to eat, but to be forced to drink until you are stumbling and ridiculous, and then dance degrading dances while the Spartans watch with their young men. You are an educational exhibit. The lesson is, don't be this. The hangover the next morning is entirely yours. Then there is the thing they do in autumn. The sharpest young men from the training program are sent out at night, armed with nothing but a knife, with instructions to kill shield bearers. Not criminals, not troublemakers, just the strongest and most capable ones, the ones who would be leaders anywhere else. It is an annual cull of potential. You learn very young not to be conspicuous. You learn that ability is a liability. You have known men who disappeared in autumn. You did not ask where they went. That is not cowardice. That is what it looks like to live inside a system that has scheduled the killing of capable people into its yearly calendar and called it a rite of passage for the killers. And yet, and this is the complication at the heart of everything, you also understand what the training actually produces. in a way no Athenian philosopher sitting in a comfortable lecture hall ever will. You have watched boys enter it at 7 as ordinary children and emerge at 20 as something genuinely different. And what it produces is not cruelty, exactly, though cruelty is present. It is composure, a specific, eerie composure under conditions that would dissolve any ordinary person. They learn to wear nothing on their faces. They learn that displaying feeling is not depth but vulnerability. The warrior you will eventually serve, the man whose shield you carry, whose armor you buckle, was one of those boys. You watched him get beaten for stealing figs, and you are bound to him, and he knows it. And neither of you will ever say it directly, because that is not the language either of you was given. You march to war for the first time when you are around 20. The year is 480 BC. The Persian Empire, the largest political entity in human history, stretching from Egypt to the edges of what will one day be called India, has come to Greece. Its king, Xerxes, has built a bridge of boats across the strait, separating Europe from Asia, and crossed it with an army that even conservative estimates place around 100,000 soldiers. He wants Greece. He intends to take it. The Spartan response is complicated by a 9-day religious festival during which Spartan law forbids military campaigns. If you're going to build a civilization based on absolute obedience to law and custom, you cannot choose which laws to honor based on whether the timing is convenient. So King Leonidas takes his royal bodyguard, 300 full citizens, ahead of the main army to hold a coastal pass called Thermopylae until the festival ends. You march with them, not because anyone asks. You march because your master marches, and where a Spartan warrior goes on campaign, his attendants go. The heroic legend of the 300 will spend the next 2,500 years forgetting this. Now there are several hundred of you. The pass is approximately 15 meters wide at its narrowest, barely enough room for a single cart, cliffs to the west, sea to the east. For 2 days, Xerxes sends wave after wave of his best troops into that corridor, and they are repulsed every time, because numerical advantage means nothing when only 20 men can fight at once. Your job during the battle is to stay behind the line, hold spare spears, pull wounded men to the rear, hold water, strip gear off Persian dead when the lines shift. You are 20 years old and you smell like blood, and you haven't slept since you left the valley. And none of this looks anything like what you imagined war would look like from the back of a farm in Laconia. On the 3rd day, a local Greek man offers Xerxes a goat track over the mountain that brings out behind the Greek position. Leonidas sends the allied contingents away. He keeps the 300, the Thespians who refuse to leave, and the shield-bearers. No one asks the shield-bearers. There is a Spartan named Eurytus, who has been suffering from an eye infection severe enough to leave him nearly blind. He is being treated in the rear camp when word comes that the pass is being surrounded. He calls for his armor. His attendant helps him put it on, buckles the leg armor, positions the shield, places the spear in his hand. And then Eurytus says, "Take me to where my friends are fighting." The attendant does this. He guides his half-blind master through the camp toward the sound of the killing. And then, Herodotus writes, the attendant turned and fled. Herodotus records this without comment, without judgment. The attendant ran the way water runs downhill, and the historian found his survival so unremarkable he didn't think to disapprove of it. Eurytus plunged into the battle and died alongside the 300. He will be remembered for 2,500 years. And the man who buckled that armor onto those trembling hands, who walked him step by step toward a sound no rational person would walk toward, that man will not be remembered. History found his survival so natural, it didn't even think to be disappointing. You, watching from behind the line, understand something in that moment. The system is not designed for your death to mean anything. Your master's death means everything. Yours means nothing. So you just keep going for 40 years. Which is a long time to spend as a glorified backpack for a guy who might be legally allowed to kill you on a Tuesday. A year later, at Plataea, the armies of Greece assemble for the final reckoning with the Persian force occupying the countryside. The scale is entirely different. The Spartan force numbers 5,000 full citizens, the whole army, and 7 shield-bearers for every one warrior. Let that land. 35,000 people exactly like you, all equipped for war, and the largest Greek force ever assembled. And more than 2/3 of the Greek component are shield-bearers whose names will appear in no history and on no monument. You fight on the flanks as a light-armed skirmisher. Javelin, knife, no 60 pounds of bronze between you and the world, which means you are fast and using your terror productively. When the Persians break, it becomes a pursuit, and the pursuit becomes a slaughter. And then the practical work begins. The Persian camp is full of the accumulated wealth of empire. Golden arm rings, silver drinking vessels, embroidered tents, The Spartans assign the shield bearers to strip it. Herodotus records the detail with quiet amusement. Your people find gold items in the camp and, having been raised inside someone else's economy without ever being told the rules of the wider world, try to sell gold to merchants at the price of bronze. The merchants buy it at bronze prices and become rich. This is not stupidity. This is what it costs to grow up inside a total institution without ever being told the world operates by different rules entirely. The Spartan dead at Plataea are buried in 3 graves. Full citizens in one, servants in another, separated even in death, honored enough for burial, segregated to the last. You come home from Plataea as something slightly different from what you left as. Though you couldn't name the difference precisely. You return to the farmland, your master returns to the evening mess, the magistrates declare their annual war on you, and the world reassembles itself exactly as it was. But you know how he sleeps on campaign now, one shoulder raised, permanently braced, like his body never entirely stops expecting impact. You know he eats the evening broth, dark, made from pork blood and vinegar. The one a visiting nobleman once tasted and said, explained why Spartans had no fear of death, because clearly they'd found something worse, without any expression on his face. But you've noticed he always reaches for a second measure of bread afterward. You draw your own conclusions about what composure costs the person performing it. Your master found the nobleman's comment funny. He didn't smile, but you knew. You'd been watching that face for 15 years. Mantinea, 418 BC. You are around 40. The battle pits Sparta against an alliance of Argos, Mantinea, and Athens. And what you witness is the machine at its absolute peak. Thucydides records that the Spartan advance comes in silence, moving to the rhythm of flute players inside the formation, not for religion, but to ensure the line advances evenly, in time, without breaking order. Every other Greek army of this era charges with haste and shouting. The Spartans walk, a crimson wall of shields, moving to flute music, at a measured pace, in silence. The psychological effect on the men in the enemy's front rank is something the academically inclined might consider briefly before moving on, but which the people actually standing there likely found difficult to forget. The battle ends with roughly 1,100 enemy dead against perhaps 300 Spartans, and Thucydides delivers his verdict. The Spartans, by universal admission, showed themselves the best warriors. You have seen the whole thing from behind the line, and you are standing in the fading Arcadian light thinking about the gap between what you have watched your entire life and the line you have never been permitted to stand in. Not for want of capability, but because you were born as something the line wasn't designed to accommodate. The frustration is complicated enormously by the fact that the line is genuinely extraordinary, and you have devoted your life to it, and it was never built with you in mind. The citizen count tells the story more plainly than any battle map. Roughly 8,000 or 9,000 full Spartan citizens at Thermopylae, significantly fewer by Mantinea. By the 390s, a conspiracy is uncovered that strips the mask off what is underneath. A fallen citizen named Cynodon is caught plotting revolution. A Spartan official takes him to the market and tells him to count the full citizens present. On his Cynodon counts the king, the 5 magistrates, the council of elders, and about 40 others. The official gestures at the rest of the crowd and says, "Those are your enemies. All the rest, more than 4,000, are your allies." 4,000 potential revolutionaries in the Spartan market on any given day, and the citizen body has shrunk to where 40 of them can be identified in a crowd. By 371 BC, roughly 700 full citizens march to a field called Leuctra, in Boeotia. You are around 60. Your master has been dead for a decade. You have been reassigned, state property attached to a younger man who looks at your age and sees a liability he hasn't gotten around to addressing yet. The Theban general Epaminondas has designed a counter to the Spartan formation, a left-wing column 50 ranks deep, instead of the standard 8, aimed directly at the Spartan king, led by the most cohesive military unit in Greece. The Spartan cavalry is routed first. It crashes back into its own infantry, and then the hammer arrives. The Spartan king falls. 400 of 700 citizens die before the afternoon ends. The myth of Spartan invincibility ends in a single afternoon on a field in Boeotia. You are standing well behind the engagement, holding gear that no one comes back to claim, when you hear the sound, not the controlled music of the advance, but the different sound that comes when a formation breaks. When the machinery of war dissolves into panic, you have heard it before from the enemy's side. You have never heard it from yours. Epaminondas invades Laconia the following winter, and for the first time in living memory, campfires are visible from the unwalled city. He marches into Messenia, the conquered land Sparta has held for 2 centuries, and declares the shield-bearers there free. He builds them a city with walls that later visitors will call the strongest they have ever seen. He takes a third of Sparta's territory and half its labor force in a single act. Without that agricultural surplus, the system of full-time citizen warriors supported entirely by their land is economically impossible. The liberation doesn't just defeat Sparta, it pulls out the foundation the entire structure was resting on. You watch from a distance and find the accounting more complicated than expected. You are a Laconian, not a Messenian. You have no living memory of being anything else. Neither did your parents. What you have is 40 years of a life organized around men who are dead, and a system that is breaking, and a valley you know the way you know your own hands. The river running below the reeds, the smell of pine off the western mountain in November, the weight of a spare spear at the edge of a battlefield. None of it is legally yours. All of it is yours in the only sense that eventually matters. Here is what you know by the end. And the system produced something genuinely extraordinary. The men you served were brave, not because training left them no other option, but because you watched them closely enough over decades to know the difference between courage and the inability to imagine alternatives. And these men could imagine the alternatives and went toward the spears anyway. That part is not myth. But the system was also a machine for consuming everyone who wasn't already inside it. And you were the fuel. And the fuel was never asked for consent and was never going to receive any. Plutarch will eventually record that when the freed shield-bearers were asked to sing the old Spartan songs, they refused. Their reason, the masters would not like it. These were people who had just been declared free by the most powerful general in Greece, and their first act was to decline something on the grounds that their former master's preferences still governed them. This is what a lifetime inside a total institution produces. A floor below which it becomes impossible to think, which you don't know is there until you're standing on the other side of freedom and wondering why free doesn't feel the way you expected. The shield was always in your hands. It was never yours to carry home. And somewhere in the valley of the Eurotas, an old man with no name in any record sits with that knowledge, watching a world that was built on his labor begin to build itself into something else. Without him, without his name, without so much as a line in the history that will remember everything except the people who made it possible. That's a wrap. The shield-bearer who armed Eurytus at Thermopylae and then ran is real. Herodotus records him in 2 sentences and never gives him a name. The 35,000 at Plataea are real. The annual cull targeting the strongest workers, the mess hall humiliations, the collapse at Leuctra, the liberation of Messenia, the freed men who refused to sing because the masters wouldn't like it, all of it documented in Herodotus, Thucydides, Xenophon, and Plutarch. If this one got you, leave a comment. Subscribe for more. See you in the next one.